Welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council meeting. It is July the 29th, and Councilmember Sean Wright has our prayer and our pledge.
Bow our heads. Thank you, Lord, for the continued blessings of our community, state, and nation. Please be with the leaders of those three entities as we move forward in the coming days. Be with those that have illnesses, emotional problems, or financial problems as we move through the hopefully the end of this pandemic season. Thank you, Lord, for being with all of us, and in your name we pray. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. As you know, the purpose of the STARS Award is to recognize and reward those employees who go above and beyond their normal job duties in providing outstanding service. Captain Alan Smith nominated Officer Fiddler, Officer Fugate, and Officer Hanson for doing just that. On June 15, 2021, these officers responded to an apartment for an emergency medical assist. Officer Fugate, Hanson, and Fiddler all arrived at the same time and found a child not breathing. The parents of the child were screaming and visibly shaken, unable to provide any assistance. As the officers attempted to provide treatment, the parents were so hysterical it kept interfering with giving aid to the child. Officer Hanson and Officer Fiddler were able to get the parents away from the child, which is when Officer Fugate immediately picked up the child, rolled him over, and issued a few stern pats on his back. The child exerted a large amount of fluid, which cleared his airway. Officer Fugate then rolled the child over and began CPR, which got the child breathing again. Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue Department and EMS arrived on the scene and began to further treat the child. As a result of these officers remaining calm and jumping into action, working together as a team during a very stressful circumstance, they were able to quickly take control of the situation and provide life-saving measures that resulted in a child's life being saved. Thank you, Officer Fiddler, Fugate, and Hanson, for your outstanding performance.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hey, before we get too far along tonight, I had an email that was sent to me of a couple of pictures, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring this up tonight. I know Councilman Shacklett, who's not here, he received the same email. But Thursday, I know Councilman Wade and Councilman Wright, you were there, but we opened Costco on Thursday. And it was really cool to come in and see all the Costco employees had their Costco shirts on, but the dome of the city was in their logo. That's what they had picked for the logo for the Costco of Murfreesboro. I think I got word back there were 1,400 patrons the first hour at Costco. It was one of the largest openings that they've ever had. So I thought it'd be appropriate. John Harney has been instrumental and involved in this the entire time, and we had talked about some different things to maybe give some context on how we got here, and also to show the pictures that you sent us all from this past Saturday, John. So the podium's yours.
Thank you, Mayor. If the picture could be thrown back up, if that's possible, this was a drone shot that was taken Saturday morning about 10:30. And to put it in perspective, when Costco started really getting serious about the site, they came in and said they needed 750 parking places. And I thought, wow, why you need so many parking places? Well, this is evidence right quick of why they do. Because there were probably left less than 50 parking places at 10:30 on Saturday morning. I talked to Costco today, and they say we're not going to throw out any numbers, but we are very, very pleased with the first week of being open in Murfreesboro. But I think what the community and everyone needs to realize, this wouldn't have happened without the leadership of the mayor and the council and the vision to go after Costco, because there are municipalities all over this country, far bigger than ours, that chase Costco year after year. Holly Sears, now Holly Montgomery, she and I called on Costco at the shopping center convention in 2007. Unbeknownst to me, the developer of the property, Mickey Mitchell, the Westmount property, was calling on them at the same time out there at the shopping center convention. And they came and went more than one time looking at our community, but finally back in about early 19, they really started getting serious. But this wouldn't have happened without your leadership of pulling a team together to say, we want Costco, now how do we make this happen? And that came together with the developer owner, Mickey Mitchell, being willing to very greatly discount the land to the city as part of the incentive package. The IDB board agreeing to do the pilot program as an incentive, and the county commission and the county mayor getting behind that. But the devil's in the details, and for 2 years, a lot of city staff, a lot of the chamber, a whole lot of people worked together to make this happen. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Sam Huddleston and Gary Whitaker and Greg McKnight and David Ives and your legal team and the city manager, Mr. Tyndall, because a lot of meetings went on, a lot of back and forth with Costco, because they know what they bring. And so they want to be courted. But the great news is they've arrived, and it's a great win for everybody. Just so the public knows that just the city's portion of the annual sales tax to the city, it will be over $3 million a year, not counting what the county gets to keep. But I think the even bigger win will be for the city residents out there. Not only is the interchange now, the Warrior Drive New Salem intersection be revamped, with the city's encouragement, the state's getting ready to work on the off-ramps there at the exit. And also, within 3 years, a new bridge will connect to River Rock on the north end of the property, which gives all those Cason Lane residents another way to get out, rather than have to fight every day out on the Old Fort Parkway to get on the interchange. So this is a great example of when everybody in this community works together, we all win, and everybody comes out to the good. I want to thank you for all the hard work of everybody that worked this to put this together, and your leadership as mayor and council to make this happen. Just thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harney. We appreciate you. I thought it was pretty interesting being out, several of us at 6:45 on Thursday morning, and there were probably 150 people in line to go to Costco, going all the way back to 2016. And I think people would ask, that people wouldn't ask about the schools, or they would say, hey, when's Trader Joe's, or when's Whole Foods, or when's Costco coming? And over the last, several years, we couldn't get Whole Foods, but we got Sprouts, and I think Sprouts had the largest opening that they had ever had at the time in Murfreesboro. And this really just goes to show, we've talked about this. We talked about this at our council retreat about demographics, and Costco does not come to a community that does not have rising demographics and rising median income. So I'm thankful to all the staff who worked very hard on this to make it come to fruition, and then what it's going to show for the residents moving forward. So thank you for your hard work. All right, we'll move into the consent agenda. Anything that need to be pulled off the consent agenda before we vote?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, you have the minutes of the July 8th and the July 14th meetings. Any additions or deletions to the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, we'll move into new business. You have Resolution 21R29. This is the Comcast Cable TV franchise agreement. Mr. Bozeman.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. You have before you a resolution approving a 10-year cable television franchise with Comcast. It's a non-exclusive franchise that permits Comcast to continue using the city rights-of-ways to deliver their service to our citizens. If you recall, at your June 9th meeting, workshop meeting, we went over the agreement. Also, the Cable Television Commission conducted a public hearing and also reviewed it, and they recommend approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Bozeman?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Resolution 21R28, SunTrust Bank Credit Card Administration.
This resolution just updates the authorized employees for the change in personnel that has taken place since the original resolution was passed for the credit card administration.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Resolution 21R26, redesignation point of contact for JAG grants.
Similar to the previous resolution, it's updating the representatives with the change in personnel that's taken place since the prior resolution.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Resolution 21R11, solid waste fees. Mr. Gore.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to come forward tonight. This is a little bit of a housekeeping item. On June 3rd, you passed on second reading the solid waste ordinance revisions. This resolution, which is a tabulated solid waste fees, was included in that package, but it was not considered independently of the second reading of the ordinance. So none of the values have changed. Nothing's changed since June 3rd. We're just asking you to pass the resolution this evening.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move into land use matters. We have to conduct a public hearing for approximately 39 acres in zoning for approximately 39 acres along Elam Road. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland, and good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of council. Our first public hearing tonight is with regards to the annexation, and I've got a box on my screen. I'm going to ask Mr. Bozeman if he's still here to see if he can help me figure out how to get this box on my screen so I can. Oh, it went away. All right. Just like that, Mr. Bozeman comes up. They must have been afraid of him. I don't know. Our first item, as I mentioned, is the annexation of a little under 40 acres along the east side of Elam Road. It's south of the Joe B. Jackson Parkway I-24 interchange. It's the area colored in green on the map before you. It's a portion of a much larger parcel, about 185 acres. The majority of the property in the area is undeveloped agricultural land. This property has been requested for annexation by the property owner, and there's a companion zoning request that we'll go over in the next item on the agenda. Show you the aerial photo now. You can see the majority of the property in the area is undeveloped. However, if you go across I-24 to the east, you can see the big Amazon warehouse and some of the industrial development along Joby Jackson Parkway to the east. Included with the study area is a 275 linear foot section of Elam Road. The County Road Board did vote at its June meeting to grant consent for the city to annex that small portion of Elam Road right-of-way, so that way all the right-of-way directly in front of the study area would be within the city limits if you choose to annex the property. The plan of services is in the agenda packet, and we will be able to extend services to this property. I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding the annexation or the plan of services before or after we conduct the public hearing.
Any questions on the plan of services and the annexation? Okay, we'll need to conduct a public hearing. If you wish to speak, if you'll please come to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes. If you're an individual, 5 minutes. If you're representing a group, if you'll keep all questions directed to the council, we'll get those answered at the end of the public hearing. You will need, if you don't mind, to please state your name and address for the record. Anyone wishing to speak for the plan of services and annexation, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider Resolution 21R PS 21, and this is for the plan of services.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, we'll consider Resolution 21RA 21, and this is for the annexation.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now need to conduct a public hearing on the zoning request. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is for the same property. It's the companion zoning request to GI, which stands for General Industrial. The property owner who requested annexation is the same applicant for the zoning request as well. If you approve it, it would come into the city limits with a zoning classification of General Industrial. You can see the property to the north is already zoned General Industrial. That's the several properties that are owned by the Dempsey family. And property to the west across Elam Road is also zoned General Industrial. So there's already a large amount of General Industrial in the area. The current approved 2035 future land use map identifies this area as business park, which is more of office uses. So this is not consistent with our current 2035 future land use map. However, as you know, we are in the process of working to update that and making a lot of good progress on updating it. And I think we'll be looking to change staff's recommended vision for this area to be more consistent with the general industrial zoning district that's already existing in the area. As I mentioned during the previous public hearing, most of the property in the subject area is agricultural or undeveloped. There is one single-family residence directly to the south of the subject property. Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this matter on June 2nd and voted to recommend approval of this zoning request to you. I'll be happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions for the applicant, her representative, Mr. John Harney, is here available to answer any questions. Be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. We'll need to conduct a public hearing on this zoning request for 39 acres. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading ordinance 21 OZ 21.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move to item 22. This is a rezoning request for 17.26 acres located along the west side of North Tennessee Boulevard, north of East Northfield Boulevard. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is property that's known as the Point at Raiders Campus apartment complex. The majority of the property is zoned RM16. That's the area in the green color on the map before you, and there's a small triangular shaped portion of the property that's zoned OG, Office General. totals about 17 acres. It's currently developed with an apartment complex. The apartment complex has fallen into a little bit of disrepair over the years. There's a new property owner, Capstone, who is looking to make upgrades to the property and looking to kind of rebrand the apartment complex. Right now, it was built in 2005 generally as a student-oriented apartment complex with 3 and 4 bedroom apartment units. The applicants are looking to make some modifications to the interior of the buildings to where it will be comprised of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units to be marketed towards a more traditional sector of the market as opposed to student-oriented. And the reason they're having to come before you, as I mentioned, it's already zoned multifamily, but the reason that they're having to come before you tonight is because the density would be increased above the maximum 16 dwelling units per acre that's allowed in the RM16 zone. The proposed density of 19.98 units per acre necessitates the rezoning to a planned development. One important thing to note about this is that even though they're increasing the density with regards to the number of units, the number of bedrooms overall will actually be decreased by 172. So they're going from 218 to 346 units, but the number of bedrooms is being decreased by 172 bedrooms, and the number of bathrooms is being decreased by 173 bathrooms. So the impact of this development, even though it will have a greater number of units, will actually be, in some regards, less than the existing development. This property went before the council a month or two ago for a sanitary sewer allocation ordinance variance and was granted that variance. Even though the consumption should be less than what is being consumed right now, the number of units necessitated the sanitary sewer allocation ordinance variance, and that was granted by council. Without going into too much detail about how they propose to divide or to modify the complex, I'd invite Mr. Clyde Roundtree up to the podium. He's got a short presentation that he would like to give you, and there's also a representative of Capstone here if you have any questions for him. Got to sift through Mr. Roundtree's multiple PowerPoints for tonight.
Thank you, Matthew. Mayor McFarland, council members, my name is Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering, and I'm excited to represent Capstone Development Company in regards to the Raiders, Point at Raiders Apartments. This has been a real fascinating project to work on. I just want to give you a little brief history. Mr. Moran's going to come and explain to you the process that they go through with the apartments, but I want to say that having been in the planning environment here for multiple years, apartments are something that we're having to wrestle with as a community. And unfortunately, around the MTSU campus, a lot of the apartments have a lot of issues that are tough to deal with. And as a result, a lot of apartments throughout Murfreesboro have had to kind of change their character and change their operations, and it's become something where the perception needs to change. And I think Capstone Development has come up with a formula that can help us change this perception. So that's why I'm very excited. Just to explain a little bit of a process that Matthew was alluding to, and Christian will come and explain it to you as well, but Christopher will, but it's basically, he called it the death spiral. And it would explain to me, and I want you to know this because I think it's happening in multiple apartments around the campus. He says when something becomes student housing, basically it becomes a rent-by-room scenario. And when something becomes a rent-by-room scenario, it doesn't take much for it to be a difficult scenario for people to live together. So when 4 people can't get along or can't find roommates to occupy those 4 rooms, often 1 room, 2 rooms may go unoccupied. So what happens from a rent standpoint, they're only paying for the rooms that are occupied. So if you can imagine 50% of your apartment with 50% capacity, it begins to create a financial strain. And so what we're seeing at Point of Raiders and other apartments that they're beginning to analyze, that there's just this death spiral starts with the lack of occupancy, which means it changes the amount of income, which means it affects the maintenance. and it just continues to go downward, downward, downward. And so the Point at Raiders is really a test case example of what they've experienced around other college towns in the United States. But it's been interesting it's been very informative to us as consultants to understand why these kind of things happen. We had a neighborhood meeting, and it focused on 5 different things that I would just like to mention. Several are maintenance issues. When you get into that situation where you can no longer maintain the facility, a lot of your basic issues start. On this particular campus, drainage is an issue because the drains aren't being cleaned. The parking lots are silting in. All your drain inlets on the parking lot are silting in. So obviously Capstone, with their new management, will take care of a lot of the maintenance issues that they're currently experiencing at this particular complex. That includes landscaping. Because it wasn't maintained, the landscaping is overgrown, and it's created not only a visual, it's affected the appearance of the facility, but it's also created some security issues as well. A big one, and this is something as we have to think through design, there's a compactor on the front of this property. So when you go through the main gate, the first thing you see is a compactor off on your left, and then you'll see the offices on the right. Well, that compactor has been in various forms of disrepair for multiple years. So outside the compactor, there were multiple poly carts that were full of trash. We didn't know if the compactor was working. But really, because the compactor is centrally located at the front of the property, all the residences tend to put their garbage on the car and take it on their way out of the development and then drop off their garbage, because there's really no way for them to get the garbage there, because they could literally be almost a block away from the actual compactor itself. So our solution is to create multiple opportunities for dumpsters to be located all around the property. Real easy solution, but it creates a big problem. I mean, at the neighborhood meeting, we found out that garbage begins to migrate off the property. Not only does it fall off someone's hood and breaks it right there on the property, but it starts blowing down the road, and it affects the neighbors. But the biggest issue that came out was the security. And when a building becomes in disrepair, a lot of times your lighting doesn't work any longer. Like you said, the landscaping is overgrown. One of the main gates is permanently shut. The main gate doesn't open and operate properly. So it's just a lot of issues that are compounding on this particular facility. So in comes Capstone, and I really do see them as a great solution to a problem that we have throughout Murfreesboro. And with that in mind, Christopher, if you come up, Christopher can walk you through kind of their process, where they've been, and also kind of the bifurcation process that is a little bit of a mystery sauce that they know how to manage. But with that in mind, I'll be available for any questions after the presentation and after the public hearing to answer anything you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Clyde. Good evening. Thank you for your time. My name is Christopher Moran. I'm the principal of Capstone Real Estate Investments. As Clyde mentioned, new owner of Point at Raiders campus. This property was purpose-built in 2005, as Clyde mentioned, and when we say purpose-built, we tend to refer to a 4-bedroom, 4-bath unit that is really exclusively intended to house a transient 18 to 21-year-old student. And given the comparative proximity to campus and a multitude of other things, this property has really floundered and entered that death spiral Clyde mentioned. So the previous owner attempted to combat this by reducing rents and changing management companies and doing this, that, and the other. There's really no way to put lipstick on this pig. After years of rate reduction, it's really attracted non-students, and the non-student involvement has really created a lot of difficulties. Anytime anything is used for a reason other than what it was intended for, it tends to really create problems. So how do we fix it? That's, I think, why we're here tonight, and the answer to that is the same way we've addressed this very same problem in several other student markets, and that is to redesign the element that makes this particular property, quote unquote, purpose built. So once finished, the unit mix will mirror that of more conventional floor plans. While the property will increase the number of units, there'll be a significant reduction in total potential occupancy, as Clyde had mentioned. So that, of course, means less utility consumption, water, sewer, less trash being created, less traffic on the streets, less noise at night. Many of these things are addressing the problems that we heard during the neighborhood meeting. So along with the unit reconfiguration, we'll also add and update amenities throughout. Landscape, security, dog park, adding covered parking, and addressing all the deferred maintenance that Clyde had mentioned. So the conversion, the physical conversion, along with our operational changes, will really change the clientele who will ultimately be interested in this property. We will certainly not be turning students away, but just given the structure, there will likely be far fewer students interested in living at this community, and that often translates into a more steady and oftentimes more responsible resident profile. So we will not offer any type of government subsidized assistance or anything like that. So ultimately, as discussed, our goal is to convert the property from a failed student housing community into a fully upgraded, vibrant, conventional, community that I think everybody, the city, the neighborhood, and Capstone can be proud of for years to come. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Ms. Skills-Harris.
Do you have a cap on the percentage of students you're going to let in? What about if you see a trend where 3/4 of students, do you have a cap on the number you really want to see for students?
No cap per se. Again, the unit mix, and the operating is kind of, it will deter students for some degree. So student properties often leased by the bed, which is what the current property operates as. We will be changing to a by the unit structure. So there'll be fewer utilities included. The lease term itself will not coincide with the academic term. There's just a multitude of things that don't necessarily coincide to what students are looking for. So to answer your question, no real cap, but and we can't prohibit them from living there, and just from a fair housing standpoint anyway. But as with the case in the city of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, amongst others, infusing kind of the same business model, it is a minority amount of residents that will be students here.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, we'll need to conduct a public hearing to rezone approximately 17.26 acres. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll have consider ordinance 21 OZ 22 on first reading. I want to make just one point. For the last many years, we've talked about these student complexes that even though you may have 200 units, there's 750 individual leases inside those units. And Mr. Blomley, I see you shaking your head. I think the applicant brought up a good point that there, a lot of these student complexes where we have had major crime issues, major shots fired issues, they all run 9-month calendar leases as opposed to the traditional 12 months where people have to up for 12 months. And at the same time, to what the question Ms. Skills-Harris answered or asked, you may have a student who's 20 years old living in one room in a 4-unit complex, and you may have a 30-year-old who's leasing in that same complex. So I think what the applicant's doing, the more of these units that are more bed-driven as opposed to unit-driven, the more of these that we can get out of the city, the better off we're going to be from a crime standpoint and all of the other things that we're dealing with right now. So I applaud y'all for what you're doing.
And Mayor McFarland, I did want to mention that this is the second complex that Capstone is doing this at. They're doing one on South Rutherford Boulevard, the complex behind Cookout, and no rezoning was needed for them to be able to do that. So they're, this is kind of their forte.
And the other point, too, seeing what the applicant's doing, you're actually talking about actually doing changes inside the units as opposed to rebranding the unit and changing the name of the unit and the sign out front, hoping that that's going to change the issues you're having. So hopefully the more of these we have, some of the issues we have around the campus will go away.
I'll make a motion, we approve it. So there's no questions.
Motion is, Ms. Brown, Mr. Wright had the second. If you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Plumley. All right, we'll now move to rezone approximately .33 acres located along the west side of Leaf Avenue, and this is, south of East Clark Boulevard planning.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is a rezoning request located along Leaf Avenue, as you mentioned, just south of East Clark Boulevard. It's a vacant lot that is .33 acres, just about a third of an acre. The applicants are requesting to rezone it from RS10 to PRD. Mr. Burns wishes to build 2 single-family homes on the property, and we're looking at various zoning options. The RS6 zone, he just falls 2 feet short on his minimum lot width. So while we discussed rezoning to a bulk zoning RS6, he was 2 feet short on that, and so we recommended that he consider the PRD zone instead of a bulk zone. What he is proposing to do is essentially an RS6 single-family development, 2 single-family lots with single-family detached homes located on them, and both lots would be greater than 6,000 square feet. As I mentioned, the only reason that he couldn't go RS6 is because there is just a lack of 2 feet for the minimum lot width. The Murfreesboro 2035 Comprehensive Plan recommends that the property develop as suburban residential. Suburban residential is primarily single-family detached uses at 2 to 3.54 dwelling units per acre. Mr. Burns' proposed development is a little bit more dense than the 3.54 dwelling units per acre that is recommended by the Murfreesboro 2035 plan. However, it's not much more dense, and he is proposing single-family detached homes that are generally consistent with single-family detached uses in the area. Planning Commission considered this rezoning request at its June the 2nd regular meeting and voted to recommend approval. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Clyde Roundtree up to give a brief presentation, and he and Mr. Burns are both available if you have any questions for them, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Mayor McFarland, council members, my name is Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel Engineering, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you Leaf Avenue PRD. Again, this is with Mr. Brian Burns, who's made a significant commitment to trying to revitalize downtown with the various developments he's already been a part of. Leaf Avenue is going to be another one of those. This was a unique situation in that it was a vacant lot, been vacant for a long time, and Brian was creative enough to consider the possibility of breaking it into 2 lots and see if we could do something very nice on the property. But if you look at the zoning map, it's important to understand because to the north, or really, I'm sorry, to the south of the property, or the north property, there is a dental office, and so the fellow who owns that property came to the meeting last time, to the public hearing, and was concerned about the architectural character and the relationship to his property, so we were able to speak to him about that. But we want to note that as Brian would describe it, this is kind of a lot of transitional architecture here. Across the street, there's an apartment complex, catty corner, there's a church, as was mentioned, there's a dental office to the south, is a single-family residence to the back is a cemetery. So some of the concerns that came up from a planning standpoint was really related to the architecture, being a little bit more contemporary in style, and we feel like it's justified in the fact that it's right next to commercial. Brian likes that look because it is a little bit more contemporary looking, and we feel like contextually it works in the fact that there's so much commercial around it. So that one thing Brian may need to address in the public hearing if it comes up. But also, as Matthew mentioned, this catalyzed the PRD because the lots were too narrow, or at least one of the lots was too narrow. So 2 single-family detached homes are what we're proposing. The nice thing about infill projects is the infrastructure was there and ready available to us to work with. And if you look at the aerial, it does show you kind of the patchwork kind of quilt to this neighborhood, specifically where this lot is located, a lot of transitional uses. And just to walk them through, on the top right, number A, or letter A, is the dental office next to the property. C is the apartment complex kind of across the street. And then if you look on the F is really catty corner. That's the church facility back catty corner from this property. And then E is the actual property itself. So it's being embedded in an existing community. Overall site plan's concerned, there are front-loaded garages, which was another concern, but as mentioned on both the project, this one and the next one, due to the narrow nature of the lots, we had to do front-loaded garages, but they are capable of stacking the cars in the driveway, and with front-loaded car garages, one thing we've learned is that in this case, one projects, one recesses, but the goal is not to allow them to project too far. So we're really trying to keep them consistent with the overall facade. A lot of times with front-loaded garages, the nose of the garage sticks out significantly on the house, and we know that's something we want to work against. So Brian's been trying to do his best to find floor plans that work within the context of keeping that garage very consistent on the front elevation. So with that, you can see that the garage does not protrude at all, and or very, very little. And this one actually recesses, but it's very consistent with the overall facade. A various mixture of materials. Mr. Burns can get into that as far as the justification of that, but it does have a little bit more contemporary edge. And this is the property that's located adjacent to the dental clinic, and very similar front entry garage, more contemporary style, low pitched roofs. One of the questions that came up in planning was whether the roofs had any pitch at all. These do, but again, with more contemporary architecture, you have a little bit more of an eave overhang, and also the roof pitches are lower. Landscaping wise, primarily related to the front of the property. There are some existing trees on the back of the property we're going to do our best to keep if we can do that from a drainage standpoint, but really trying to enhance the front for a good presentation from Leaf Avenue. And with that in mind, just a brief presentation. Mr. Burns is here if you have any specific questions about the project that I didn't answer, but we thank you for allowing us to present Leaf Avenue, and we're available for any questions after the public hearing. Thank you. Any
questions for the applicant? All right, thank you, Mr. Roundtree. We'll need to conduct a public hearing for this rezoning request for .33 acres. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading ordinance 21 OZ 23.
I guess I'll pass along. I was looking for it in the minutes in here, but just for the what it's worth column, the neighbor did come to the planning commission meeting and speak at that public hearing. I was looking to see if it gave more detail, but he did speak. I think it was basically against it. When you have said that's kind of how you characterize it, but yeah. So just for the what it's worth column. Yeah, here it is. Sorry, I just took me. He was really wanting to see more detailed, what exactly it was going to look like.
Any other questions?
So did it pass?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not going to vote for it now since it passed the planning?
I'll move for approval.
Okay. Thank you. Rick? Huh? What'd you say? Did you say second?
Kurt said second.
Kurt,
I'll do second.
all right, have a motion and a second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move to amend the zoning ordinance regarding townhouses, the RSA zone, and other miscellaneous topics. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is a unique situation. This public hearing was actually scheduled back for June 24th, and we had to reschedule it for tonight because after consultation with our legal department, a new state law that passed and became effective in May requires that any ordinance that proposes, or any ordinance that proposes to regulate building materials be made a separate ordinance and a separate item on the agenda, and that it be advertised separately. So because we hadn't advertised a separate public hearing back for the June 24th meeting, we put a halt on that, advertised two separate public hearings, one dealing with building materials and one with everything else that was in the originally proposed amendment. So I'll go over some of the highlights of the proposed ordinance amendment. The ordinance amendment was before Planning Commission on May the 5th, and Planning Commission voted to recommend its approval to you. The first part is with the first ordinance that you'll consider tonight is with regards to all of the facets of the ordinance amendment that do not deal with building materials. I'll go over those separately prior to our second public hearing. But just as a brief introduction, back in 2017, the zoning ordinance was amended to create the RSA and RS6 zoning districts. Really what we were attempting to do was speak to the demand of the market with regards to townhomes, to create a zoning district that was a traditional bulk zoning district, but that was not a multifamily zoning district, so that if someone wanted to build a townhome development, they didn't have to request a multifamily zoning district, which would give them the zoning entitlement to build either apartments or townhomes. So we created a single-family attached zoning district for townhomes. And we created the RS6 zone as well, which creates a traditional bulk zoning classification for single-family detached homes on slightly smaller lots than what we had been seeing up until that point. So a few of the highlights of the ordinance amendment. Right now, the definition for townhouse dwelling does not specify that it is or the definition of townhouse dwelling could technically apply to both multifamily and single-family attached. What we've done is we've clarified that a townhouse dwelling is a single-family attached dwelling. And that seems to be consistent with the intent of the 2017 zoning ordinance amendment. We've also amended Chart 1, uses permitted in the Chart 1 endnotes. One of the things about the 2017 ordinance amendment is that it was somewhat ambiguous with regards to what was permitted in each one of those, the RSA Type 1, RSA Type 2, and RSA Type 3 zoning classifications. We've made it explicit that single-family detached homes are permitted in all three of those types of RSA zoning classifications, and that suburban-style townhouses are only permitted in the RSA 2 zone, and that urban-style townhouses are only permitted in the RSA 3 zone with respect to the three types of RSA zoning classifications. In addition, the RS6 zone requires a minimum front garage setback of 35 feet in order to allow for driveways of adequate length to accommodate 4 vehicles to park on site. However, the balance of the structure is allowed a reduced minimum front setback of 25 feet, giving builders a little bit of flexibility. They can build closer to the street if they push the garage back a little bit, or they can build the entire house at 35 feet. There are a number of zoning districts, however, RS8, for example, that currently have a 30-foot minimum building setback, which is kind of leaves the parking situation in a no man's land. If you want to get 4 cars parked and the house is right on the minimum 30-foot front setback, then the back two cars are going to be blocking the public sidewalk, and that's not anything that we want to promote. So all the single-family zoning districts that had the 30-foot front setback, we're proposing to increase that to 35 feet, but to give that flexibility to have the homes up to 25 feet from the front lot line, as long as the garage is pushed back a minimum of 35 feet to the garage door. There are also several other modifications in the zoning ordinance amendment that clean up some of the language to help differentiate between multifamily residential and single-family attached residential. Some of those items were not fully distinguished in the 2017 zoning ordinance amendment, so we've really attempted to clean that up. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on May 5th and then recommended the approval of this ordinance amendment. I'll go over, before the next public hearing, after this one, I'll go over the aspects of the ordinance amendment that are in Ordinance 19, which deal with building materials. Be happy to answer any questions. And as I mentioned, we do need to conduct two public hearings, one on Ordinance 17 and one on Ordinance 19, which deals with exterior building materials.
Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, we'll need to conduct a public hearing, well, two public hearings, one on the amendment for the zoning ordinance. This is for ordinance 21017. Anyone wish to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading ordinance 21017.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll need to now consider a public hearing for the amendment for the zoning ordinance for building materials.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. I'll just be real brief with this. As I mentioned, the new state law requires us to separate out regulations dealing with building materials, and there are three endnotes that we pulled out of the first ordinance amendment and put in this separate ordinance amendment. Back in the 2017 RS6, or the 2017 ordinance amendment that included the RS6 zone, we included the requirement that each facade of single-family homes in the RS6 zone must be a minimum of, must consist primarily of one or more of the following materials: brick, stone, or cementitious siding. And other materials such as EIFS vinyl siding and wood siding may be used for decorative or accent purposes and may constitute no more than 25% of any facade. The reason for that was to prevent structural damage, or to prevent damage to adjacent structures, since these homes were only going to have 5-foot side setbacks. And in order to be consistent, what we did here was we went through our zoning ordinance, found all of the zoning districts that were similarly situated with 5-foot side setbacks, and we included this requirement for all of those zoning districts. And we also added the language that the intent is to minimize the extent of fire damage on adjacent structures. Also, we included the sentence that alternative combinations of exterior materials may be permitted only with the approval of the planning director in consultation with the building and codes director after a review of combustibility of the materials. The new state law does not allow us to prohibit any given materials, so this ordinance makes sure to not prohibit any materials and to allow different materials to be considered. And our legal department has reviewed it in conjunction with the new state law that was passed earlier this year, and our legal department believes that it is in compliance with the new state law. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing on this matter.
Any questions? All right, we'll need to conduct a public hearing on the amendment of the zoning ordinance in regards to building materials. This is ordinance 21019. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll now, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading ordinance 21-019.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second, Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now consider rezoning approximately 0.15 acres located along the south side of East Vine Street, west of South Bilbro Avenue.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The next item that we have on the agenda is a rezoning request, also brought to you by Mr. Burns, located along the south side of East Vine Street. Property is currently zoned RS8. It is also located in the City Core Overlay District. Much like with the request on Leaf Avenue, Mr. Burns would like to develop 2 single-family detached homes on the property. However, unlike Leaf Avenue, this property is quite a bit smaller. It is only 0.15 acres, so the 2 lots will be approximately 3,300 to 3,400 square feet. But other than that, the request is very similar. 2 single-family detached lots. The existing RS8 zoning only allows lots a minimum of 8,000 square feet. Obviously, these 2 lots will be less than the minimum lot size in the RS8 zone. So Mr. Burns is having to request rezoning in order to move forward with his plan. The property would remain located in the City Core Overlay District if this request is approved. The future land use map of the Murfreesboro 2035 Comprehensive Plan recommends that the property develop as suburban residential, which has a maximum density of 3.54 dwelling units per acre. The single-family detached use is consistent with the recommendations of the suburban residential land use classification. However, the lot size and the density is not consistent. However, considering the location of this property in proximity to the downtown and also being located in the City Core Overlay District, staff feels this is a good candidate for to deviate from the recommendations of the future land use plan. And as I mentioned, we are working on our update to our future land use map and are nearing its completion, and we'll be putting forth a different vision for the downtown area than the suburban residential that was recommended here. The Planning Commission considered this request at its June 2nd meeting and recommended its approval to the City Council. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. And Mr. Roundtree and Mr. Burns are here, and Mr. Roundtree has a brief PowerPoint presentation regarding this request.
Thank you, Matthew. Mayor McFarland, council members, my name is Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel Engineering. I thank you for the opportunity to present to you what we're calling the Nook on Vine. Again, Mr. Burns has found another opportunity to bring new revitalization to downtown, and that's really the emphasis of this project. The home that we're taking down is an older home. It's not necessarily in horrible shape, but it's definitely a home that would need a lot of help to come to a new standard. And so Brian will be removing that house and in its place putting 2 new homes. This one was interesting because one of the questions was the front entry garages, because a lot of the homes in this area in proximity don't have garages at all. A lot of them have carports. There's a lot of gravel driveways in close proximity. So this is going to be an upgrade from the adjacent relationships to this particular home that Brian will be developing these homes. And so the architectural character originally was a little bit more contemporary like we had on Leaf, but after some staff encouragement and walking through the process, the homes that Mr. Burns will be building are much more craftsman style. So we feel very consistent with the adjacent homes, so we're glad to see that happen. Again, there will be front entry garages, but they will be garages. One will be a 1-car garage, one will have 2-car garages, but they will be loaded for at least 3 to 4 cars in the driveway outside of the home. They'll have varied roof lines, defined bases, all the things we're starting to see architecturally wise that we know is important for the consistency among the neighbors. And so with this project, Again, we're proud of bringing it for you. Mr. Burns knows that as we're investing downtown and doing infill projects, we're probably going to get a little bit more of a denser product than what was there originally. But we also believe that in order to enhance the neighborhood and to bring vitalization, that's going to be the necessary component of that process. So we're glad to be working with the CCO. Personally, I think it's a great tool that Mr. Burns has been able to capitalize on and to leverage to allow new development to happen downtown. So we hope that we can continue to work within that parameters, and we're grateful for the opportunity. I'm available for any questions you may have related to this project. Mr. Burns is here as well, but thank you for allowing us to do a brief presentation.
Any questions? All right, we'll need to open the public hearing to rezone approximately 0.15 acres on the south side of East Vine Street and west of South Bilbro Avenue. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll now consider ordinance 21OZ24 on first reading.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, thank you. All right, we now have recommendations to schedule public hearings. What do you have, Mr. Malmley?
I just have one public hearing well, two items, but in this particular item on the agenda, one public hearing to schedule for the rezoning for the city's transit center, and we're recommending a public hearing date for the rezoning of September the 2nd.
All right. September 2nd.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we now have the rescheduling of a public hearing for zoning change request.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. We did have a public hearing scheduled tonight for the Sanders Corner PCD, which is located at the corner of Northfield and Sulphur Springs. The applicants had some unexpected circumstances occur and requested that it be rescheduled. So Mr. McKnight had some signs fabricated and put out on the site to notify the residents that public hearing was being rescheduled. And we also included a notice in the paper as well. We're recommending that it be scheduled for the same evening as the Transit Center public hearing of September the 2nd. Be happy to answer any questions.
So moved.
Motion is second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Plumley. All right, we will now move to retail liquor certificate of compliance. This is the Wine and Liquor Palace. Ms. Brown.
This is in conjunction with the state law's requirement for a new retail liquor store, Wine and Liquor Palace, to be located at 5619 Franklin Road, Suite B5. Applicants met all requirements for issuing the certificate of compliance.
Do you have a motion?
How long could we defer it? We deferred it.
Let me pull up the statute here. I believe it's,
Some 60 days.
I think it's 60 days from the date of application.
When was the application?
I'm not sure when this one was turned in. I don't have that information with me.
If somebody wants to make a motion to approve it, I'm fine with it, but if nobody makes a motion to approve it, I'll make a motion that we just defer it until we figure, we can figure that out later, but,
Well, Rick, I think that's what we talked about last time. I don't think we should hold these people hostage because they've already put this in. I think as we move forward, we can talk about the new liquor license that comes before us. I make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we now have updates to the Employee Handbook Policy 5003, Classification and Compensation. Ms. Russell.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Staff is seeking approval to amend Employee Handbook 5003 entitled Classification and Compensation. The city's pay plan needs to be competitive against the labor market, and the changes being recommended will allow for recognition of experience credit based on the position. Administration will develop a guideline for applications for experience credit. You should have an updated copy of the policy in front of you. There is no financial impact, as salaries will remain within the approved annual budget.
I think this is something we talked about at our retreat, correct? Not retreat, but our workshop.
It was.
Yeah, okay. Any questions?
The only question I had, we had some emails back and forth, and I sent an email to the public safety directors and City Manager Tyndall. I got a response back from the police side, the original, after I got the response back from you, that
Right.
basically said, that public safety didn't want to do this because they didn't want to risk hiring bad people or whatever. I kind of sent one to the directors to say, hey, is that where you guys feel about it? I got a response back from the police side through Craig, but I never did hear anything back from the fire. Is the fire department not going to take this on, or is that going to be their choice?
Public safety has a different policy. They have 5003.5 that applies to public safety.
So
This applies to general fund.
I couldn't understand whether or not this, I saw the 5003.5 that fit inside of here, but
That would be next, I think, next week.
We're trying to get that one in at the next meeting.
5003.
It was just
This is
in different
everybody but
language. We
public
couldn't,
safety?
we couldn't finish it
That's for
in
public
time,
safety.
so.
all right, I read that in there, but I thought that meant that it included 5003.5 within this.
Yeah, it's a separate written policy.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Ms. Russell. All right, we have the contract for Wide Area Network Managed Services, and this is from Information Technology. Mr. Terry.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. IT Governance tonight recommends your approval of, to enter into a 5-year contract with Comcast Business to supply our wide area managed services. Council approved earlier tonight the franchise agreement with Comcast. We've been operating under that franchise agreement for the last 18 years. Unfortunately, due to some changes in federal law, we're no longer able to add that managed service into the franchise agreement. We published a request for bids for this service. We had 3 responses. A committee from members from IT, communications, legal, and purchasing reviewed those proposals. We based our evaluations were based upon price, availability of services, construction timelines, contract terms, and overall maintenance and response times. And based upon that assessment matrix, Comcast Business was selected as the vendor of choice. This network will provide greater capabilities over our existing network. The contract does cover all facilities. It provides greater resilience and redundancy than we currently have with our existing network. Comcast is providing a mesh network, where currently we're operating under a hub and spoke, so we have much more reliability with this. The cost of this service is included in the FY22 budget. All of it's been accounted for. It's staff recommendation that you approve entering into this contract with Comcast. We'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
If there are none, I'll move for approval.
Motion and second, Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Terry. All right, we'll move to item 31, the rehire of Councilmember Relations Kennedy Ryan Martin for lifeguard staff, parks, and recreation.
I'm here, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm here to seek approval to rehire Kennedy Martin as a summer lifeguard at Sportscom. Kennedy is the daughter of Councilman Martin, and pursuant to sections 502 of the city employee handbook, council approval is required. Kennedy has worked with us in past summers and done a great job, so we're asking your approval to rehire.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
No.
Mr.
Yes.
LaLance.
I was just going to keep rocking. Jennifer kept on rocking too. Like, all right, let's keep going then.
Yes.
Yes, me too.
Wait, did he call your name?
Mr.
My
Martin.
name.
She's out there. Y'all can just throw something at her if you want to. Abstain.
Mr. Wade.
Yes.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right. Thank you, Thank you, Thomas. All right, we have a group sales event agreement for Miracle League All-Stars. You're back again, Thomas.
Murfreesboro was selected to be the host for the 2022 Miracle League All-Stars event. This prestigious event is held throughout the United States at different locations, and in 2022, September 16th, more than 100 athletes with physical and intellectual challenges will converge on Murfreesboro. They'll check into the Embassy Suites Hotel, where they'll be transported to Sportscom for the opening ceremonies, a pool party, and activities at the field. Then Saturday morning, they'll have breakfast with our mascot Homer there at the Embassy Suites before being transported to the field to experience game days like our Murfreesboro local league experiences each week, and then travel back to the Embassy Suites for a banquet and award ceremony. The contract before you is with Embassy Suites. The funding for this project has already been put into an earmarked account provided by Project 1-4 and the partnership we have with them. We're also partnering with them in this event. So we're working with a Project 1-4 and a host committee that will help raise funds so that we can put those funds back in the earmarked account to continue to offer the services at the Miracle Field Park as well as events like this in the future. So we're asking for your approval for this contract.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work on that. All right, we have item 33, the trade of firearms to Clyde Armory Incorporated for store credit. Mr. Fannington.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Captain Don Fanning from the Police Department. Y'all forgive me, it's the first time I've ever done this. So I brought y'all something this evening. What we're requesting the council this evening is to approve us to trade firearms that we now have that are excess firearms to Clyde's Armory for store credit. We're going to use that in order to purchase new weapons and accessories for the police department. Currently, we've got about 166 Generation 3 and Generation 4 Glock firearms in stock that are not compatible with the indoor range that we now use because of the use of lead-free ammunition. And so what we would like to do is to trade them to Craig's. They are an authorized law enforcement dealer. We have used them in the past, and we believe they can supply us. As a matter of fact, they have guaranteed us they can supply us these specific items that we've asked them to trade for. So I'm here if there's any questions or anything you'd like to know. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
If there aren't any, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, thank you, Captain Fanning. All right, we have the 2021-2022 Sewer Rehabilitation Project Award. Mr. Gore.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to come and present this before you tonight. I do have a little exhibit here on our FY22 sewer rehab project. This is something we do annually. You can kind of see from the vicinity map, we're kind of all over the city. This is where we find leaky manholes, a pipe that has maybe reached the end of its useful life that needs to be lined. We do have 4,000 feet of open cut sewer in this project, 10,500 cured in place sewer lining, 800 vertical feet of manhole lining, 135 new sewer service lateral replacements, and we're cleaning 5 sewer pump station wet wells. We did have an opinion of cost of $4.2 million. It came in at $4.68. We just had the one bidder. SBW Constructors has worked with us on our last, I think, 3 or 4 sewer rehab projects. They do a great job. We do have some unspent money on the FY21 project in the amount of $620,000, so it does cover the roughly $480,000 above our estimate using last year's unspent money. So we would ask for your approval to award this bid. I'm available for questions if you have some.
That's a big,
So moved.
big job. Second.
Motion and second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
All right, any, well, we have several licensing items.
We have quite a few tonight. 2 of the new locations, the restaurant at 307 North Thompson Lane and the grocery/market at 1159 Northwest Broad, have not passed their building and codes inspections. The other 2, the new location at 1233 Fortress Boulevard and the ownership change for the convenience store at 352 North Thompson Lane, have passed building and code inspections. Everything else is in line for all applicants, and we recommend approving the beer permits for these, the 2, once they pass building and codes, and the other 2 now. And then we have several special event permits, 4 of them for Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce for 4 different dates, and then an event for Nourish Food Bank and an event for Tennessee Equality Project Foundation.
We need separate motions, one motion.
I think one motion will be fine.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. You have board and commission appointments. You have a reappointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals and to the Water and Sewer Board, and then a new appointment to the Planning Commission. We can take those separately or one at a time, whoever wants to make a motion.
We can do it all at once.
We can, unless we want to
So
pull them out separately. Okay? All right, we have a motion. Ms. Skels Harris,
Second.
please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we have any statements? Do we have any statements?
None tonight.
I think we have one item of other business from staff.
Mayor, Council, thank you again. What the other business item I have before you tonight is our GE iFix software support renewal. This software is critical to our control system functions at the water and the water plant and the water resource recovery facility, as well as several remote sites. So it's critical to maintain our operations and processes at the plants. This is a software, an annual renewal for support in the amount of $30,153.60. It is, the final contract is subject to legal approval, but we would ask for you tonight to approve this purchase.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Score. Any other business, Mr. Tyndall? from
No, our
staff?
next meeting should be August the 5th, Thursday evening.
All right, we'll meet next week. Any other business from council members? All right, seeing none, we'll stand adjourned.